I find that in most cases editing can usually be divided into two camps: conventional editing and unconventional editing. Conventional editing makes up the majority of mainstream films on show today. The reason why most members of the general public you speak to these days don't really know anything about editing is because of the way films are edited. It has almost been written into film lore that the closer your cuts are to being invisible, the better. And I have absolutely nothing against this style of editing. It helps maximise the other elements of the film whilst also implanting you into the world of the characters. The way I describe it is, conventional editing adheres to the fundamental laws of editing, such as maintaining continuity, rarely, if ever, breaking the line, and always showing the important actions within the scene that are vital to the script. Unconventional editing takes a sledgehammer to these rules, breaking them in every possible way, and the films that encapsulate the breaking of these rules the best to me are those directed by Lars Von Trier. Lars Von Trier is a Danish filmmaker widely known for his brutal depiction of life. His films are embedded with themes of depression and the corruption of innocence. The stories can be grandiose in nature, but he grounds them into reality through his presentation. On the outward scale, Lars Von Trier's films are intrinsically grotesque, usually presenting the absolute worst side of people. But besides this, what always stood out to me the most was the way his films were edited, and the unique way this form of editing made me feel. So who can we thank for this editing? Well, that would be Molly Malene Stensgaard, the editor who has collaborated with Von Trier the most, working on 10 of his films. Early on in her career, after graduating from secondary school, Stensgaard secured an internship as an editor's assistant. She then went on to graduate from the editing program from the Danish Film School in 1993. Lars Von Trier first worked with Molly Malene Stensgaard, who took on the role of co-editor on TV series The Kingdom. Molly states that there was trust from the very beginning. I was new and I wasn't expecting to go right into a collaboration like this with a director like that. I did The Kingdom less than a year after graduating from film school, where I learned all sorts of rules. The first thing I heard from Lars was, forget them. It felt odd to stop this work relationship after almost 25 years, but it also felt right.
Luckily he's Danish, and luckily I bumped into him at the exact right time, right? Because I think that working with him is almost one of the greatest challenges and luxuries that you can have as an editor.
The first film they collaborated on was The Idiots. But the first film I'll be covering in depth here is their second collaboration, one of my favourite films, Dancer in the Dark. Dancer in the Dark is an incredibly unique film starring Icelandic pop singer Björk, as she plays a woman slowly turning blind who uses her love of musicals to escape from her harsh reality. Von Trier adapts an almost documentary-like style to the camera work of this film, really exposing the realism, something that is compounded greatly by the way the scenes are cut together. The constant jump cutting in time with the same shot, without cutting away through a different angle, in a vacuum may come across as highly distracting to the general viewer, so me simply showing an extract of the film isn't likely to do it justice. However, when looked at as a whole, the editing choices made throughout the film massively amplify the emotional response Von Trier wants his audience to feel. The camera movement in tandem with the unconventional editing makes the viewer feel awkward, unnerving them. It almost feels like you're peeking directly into these people's lives without their permission. When asked about whether the best edits are the ones the viewer notices, Stensgaard responded, "No, and the opposite of that is not true either. The film is always the main thing to consider, and if it's a film where a disturbing visible language of editing is the right thing to do for the film, then it's the right thing to do. However, another film you might not even recall seeing a cut afterwards. It completely depends on the film. For me, it's very important to try and create moments on the screen, moments that feel truthful, authentic, but also shift between that to something that feels like it's moving forward, feels efficient. It's actually the great dynamic of filmmaking. That's very important to work on in the edit, to make time stand still, and then to make it really move.
And I think one of the most important things in the editing is that that's where you really make the transition from written word into film.
It's here where we feed into our next film to discuss, Dogville. Dogville takes a large departure from Dancer in the Dark, a testament to the variety of Lars Von Trier's films. It's a period piece, but it's shot on a clearly visible soundstage on a set without any walls. It's essentially a theatre production, not an easy film to describe. Lars Von Trier has remarked that you can do almost anything on film now. With the help of computers, I can insert a herd of elephants into a scene, or create an earthquake. But that doesn't interest me. I'd rather draw the shape of a dog on the studio floor to mark that there is a dog there, or put a crate of beer in a corner to indicate a bar. So Dogville, to some extent, is Von Trier commenting on the loss of simplicity in modern mainstream film, and I would argue that the editing style reflects this. Rather than setting up a complicated shot list of wides and close-ups, Von Trier aligns his shooting approach to his script-writing approach, opting to capture the majority of the film's action in handheld Steadicam, following the actor's movement and performance in the scene rather than prioritising the cinematic aesthetic of his shots. Dogville maintains the unconventional cutting style of Dancer in the Dark, however, I'd argue it's slightly toned down in its approach. The jump cutting isn't quite as pronounced, however, it's certainly still present. The near-documentary feel is carried over, although one thing that sets it apart, which Von Trier would carry over to Dogville's sequel Mandalay, is the structuring of the film into explicitly defined chapters. This certainly had an interesting impact on the film's editing. The audience was already made aware of what would happen in each section of the film before watching it. So to understand Von Trier's editing style, I must first discuss some of his influences. When speaking about those who inspired him, Von Trier once commented, "Watching Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon is a pleasure, like eating a very good soup." Von Trier said, adding, "The good thing is that Kubrick always sets his standards. Barry Lyndon to me is a masterpiece." Additionally, many of Lars Von Trier's films are evident of the freedom of expression that has long since embedded itself into Danish culture, and as such, influenced his directorial style and editing heavily. The final collaboration of Von Trier and Stensgaard I will be covering here is The House That Jack Built. In my mind, Von Trier has three types of films. His more traditional narratives, like Dancer in the Dark, his chapter-divided period pieces, like Dogville, and his debate films. The House That Jack Built falls into the latter camp. Its narrative is centered around a conversation between serial killer Jack and Verge, a representation of the poet that takes Dante through hell in Dante's Inferno. The House That Jack Built is the most recent film I'll be discussing here, releasing in 2018, and as such, the most up-to-date collaboration between Stensgaard and Von Trier. It's clear that after all these years working together, the editing style has become more and more refined. The disregard for continuity and focus on performance remains. Once again, the editing style fulfills its role of enhancing the film's tone and realism, rather than simply presenting the events in a logical way for the audience to follow. The main focus of the narrative being on serial killer Jack perhaps gives the greatest motivation of any of Von Trier's films for the constant jump cutting. The audience knows they are watching an emotionally erotic serial killer, and the editing reflects this. And if I was to summarise what makes Von Trier's films, specifically those edited by Molly Malene Stensgaard, so endearing, it's how they utilise editing to its peak as a creative tool. Von Trier holds the post-production process as just as important in conveying the themes and messages of his films as the screenwriting process.
Just something about not working with continuity and working with selecting emotional moments that we feel tells the story, right?
For the majority of mainstream films, the editing process is reserved to simply connecting the events of the film in a logical way so audiences can understand what is going on in the scene. And this is where Lars Von Trier and Molly Malene Stensgaard come in. Von Trier is one of the few filmmakers with any mainstream appeal today that understands and is willing to experiment with the full potential for editing as a creative tool. The editing of his films serves a greater purpose than connecting the narrative between the scenes. The editing brings out the tone just as much as the script and cinematography. The fundamental laws of editing, they don't matter to Von Trier because why should they? Audiences don't wince when they see an unconventional shot. I'm in no way saying that there's anything wrong with conventional editing on its own. Not every film can be edited in the way of Dancer in the Dark, for example. It simply wouldn't work. But that brings me back to my main point of why Lars Von Trier and Molly Malene Stensgaard edit their films the way they do. And that's because they hold the belief that a way a film is edited is completely dependent on the individual film. And if this means the editing has to be unconventional, then so be it. I'll end this off here with a quote from Molly Malene Stensgaard. "It completely depends on the film. It's important to distinguish that it's not the editor's language, it's the film's language. An editor having a language is not interesting. It's the film that has the language, and you have to adapt to that, always."